The One Ring is taking over Modern, but today I'm going to show you a deck that generates more value by abusing a lowly 25-cent uncommon. Let me introduce you to Abiding Grace, a 3-mana white enchantment that reads, at the beginning of your end step, choose 1. You gain 1 life, or return target creature with mana value 1 from your graveyard to the battlefield, in combination with a toolbox of 1-drops including Thraben Inspector, Kami of False Hope, Haywire Might, Martyr of Sands, and Scorn Blade Berserker. Abiding Grace can generate immense card advantage turn after turn. But it doesn't stop there. Old favorites like Squadron Hawk and Ranger Captain of Eos will grind and demoralize opponents, so much so that they'll rage quit after the first game of the match. My opponent concedes the match. I think they realize they don't have a chance. But talk is cheap. Let me show you how to outgrind the One Ring in our very first match. We're kicking things off on the play, Game 2, Match 1 against Jeskai Breach, featuring, you guessed it, the One Ring. Scalding Tarn Fetch, Steam Vents, Ragavan, sure. Drew into an Emiria, I'm going to hold that. I'm going to play out my Arid Mesa, Kami, pass the turn back. Urza's Saga, Mishra's Bauble, Emry. We're going to fetch end of turn, Temple Garden, tapped. Abiding Grace, not terrible. Godless Shrine, Ranger Captain, get our might. Back to our opponent. Ranger Captain of Eos is really nice in this matchup as it can find our Haywire Might and shut down Underworld Breach with its sacrifice ability. Play out our Haywire Might, and we're going to might down the Saga right now. Opponent fetches in response, as expected. Hallowed Fountain, Shock, make a construct, Saga's gone. Still no attacks, we'll pass back. Opponent draws off the Bauble, draws for turn, starts with an iteration, Spire Bluff Canal, imagine they'll cast that out, Mox Amber, Bauble's back. End of turn, we're going to draw a card. Drew a second Abiding Grace. We're going to play out our Marsh Flats, play around a Spell Pierce, cast out the Abiding Grace. Opponent Unholy Heats the Ranger Captain, will sacrifice in response. Grace comes into play. End of turn, we're going to return the Might. Opponent bobbles me in response. Might's back. We're going to hold this for a One Ring or a Breach for now. Opponent untaps. Another Saga, we're going to let that hit. Emry back the Bauble. It's going to be a prismatic ending. Opponent attacks for 3, we're fine with that. End of turn, we're going to exile the Saga. Because we're gaining 2 life off of the Might every turn and picking off all of their artifacts, the attacks from this construct are inconsequential. Return Haywire Might. Opponent looks at my top card, end of turn. Untap, draw. 4 mana, the One Ring. Opponent gets protection from everything. They draw a card, Bauble back, play out the Bauble. Steam Vent Shock, attack for 4, sure. Might the One Ring, end of turn. Drew another land, actually not bad because we're getting closer to our Emiria here. Play out our Marsh Flats, Ranger Captain, trigger. I think we're going to get our Forge Tender here. Cast that out, turn the Might to play. Opponent looks at our top card. Opponent Breeding Pool tapped. Another One Ring, Bauble into play, attack for 4, block with the Scorn Blade. We're going to fetch before damage. Godless Shrine tapped, and we'll draw a card. Opponent draws a card with their One Ring, and we'll might it down end of turn. Okay, there's our 7th land, we're in business. 2 mana, Squadron Hawk. Trigger. Yes. 3 Hawks into hand. Another Hawk. Attack our opponent down to 6. Forge Tender, we're going to sacrifice, we're going to prevent the damage from the bolt, and we will have a lock at this point. Abiding Grace, turn our Might, exile the Amber, opponent looks at my top card, untap, sacrifice the Ranger Captain. Opponent scoops. Game 3, we're on the draw, and unfortunately, our opponent has the nuts. A turn 1 Emry into a turn 2 Ring leads to a turn 3 kill, which we can't do anything about. Not to worry though, because we bounce back strong in our next match. All right, we're on the play. Opening 7 looks excellent. We're going to keep it. Opponent mulligans to 6. We're going to lead Flooded Strand. We'll fetch Shock, and we'll get our Berserker into play. Opponent with the Spire Bluff Canal, Dragon's Rage Channeler. Drew into a Solitude. We'll start with an attack for 1. Then we're going to march down the DRC. Opponent Steam Vent Shock, Ledger Shredder, nothing else. We draw into a Godless Shrine. I think I'm going to take this opportunity to stick the Squadron Hawk. We're going to put 3 more into our hand. Godless Shrine tapped. In this instance, I think there's a good argument to shock in the Godless Shrine to avoid a situation like this and ensure value off of the Berserker. Crack for 2. We'll just take it. It's fine. Down to 15. Opponent looks at our top card. Back to us. Drew another Godless Shrine. Not bad, actually. We're going to lead on a Ranger Captain. Trigger. And I think we're going to get a Martyr of Sands here. We'll play out our Godless Shrine tapped, and then we'll pass back to our opponent. My opponent leads with an iteration. I think we're just going to let this happen. Arid Mesa, fetch, Steam Vents, Shock, Lightning Bolt down the Ranger Captain. We'll sacrifice in response. Shredder still only has 2 power. We're going to take it again. We'll untap. Drew a Marsh Flats, not bad. We'll fetch a basic Plains here. We'll cast out our Solitude. Hit down the Shredder right here and now. Attack him with the Squadron Hawk. Pass the turn back. Opponent shocks in the Sacred Foundry. Mishra's Bauble. Look at my top card. Nothing else. Drew into a Call of the Ring. Start with an attack for 4. Heat down the Solitude. Play out the Call of the Ring. Opponent spell pierces. We'll pay for that. Squadron Hawk gets bolted down. With Call of the Ring in play and our opponent attempting to 1-for-1 our threats, they slowly get outpaced by our 2 to 3 draws a turn over the next few turns. Combat will crack for 4. Draw a card. Bowmaster's not bad. Get rid of a Marsh Flats. We'll just pass the turn. Ledger Shredder from our opponent. Start with a Call of the Ring. We're going to target our Haywire Might here. We'll draw a card. Drew a Berserker. We'll start with a Bowmasters. We're going to target our opponent. Cast out our Scorn Blade. It's going to trigger the Ledger Shredder. With the introduction of Orcish Bowmasters into the format, Ledger Shredder's Connive Trigger can sometimes be a liability, as it is a must, not a may, ability, leading to a lot of damage over the course of a game. We're going to sacrifice our Thraben Inspector end of turn. Amiria seems pretty good. We'll play that out, and we'll leave our march up. Opponent scoops, up a game. Opening 7 looks great, we'll keep it. Arid Mesa, fetch, Steam Vents, Ragavan. Sure. Drew a Godless Shrine, not bad. We'll start our Marsh Flats, we'll play that out. Fetch, we're going to get a basic Plains. Play out our Forge Tender. Opponent taps, Scalding Tarn, fetch, Steam Vents, shock, DRC. No attacks to be had. Untap, drew another Plains. Start there, into a Squadron Hawk. Trigger, we'll get 2 other Hawks for now. No attacks. Consider end of turn, Breach to the graveyard. Hallowed Fountain to the graveyard. Scalding Tarn, fetch, Sacred Foundry. Prismatic Ending targeting my Forge Tender. We're going to sacrifice it. They're going to heat down my Squadron Hawk, sure. And we're going to target the Ragavan with the Forge Tender. Channeler has Delirium, Mishra's Bauble, target me, crack for 5. We're only going to take 3. Opponent draws a card. We drew a Kami of False Hope, kind of funny. With a hand chock full of blockers, my opponent struggles to make much headway over the next few turns. The game breaks when my opponent plays an Underworld Breach and makes what I perceive to be a mistake immediately after. Here's the Breach. We do have the answer to that. Lightning Bolt targeting me. We'll respond, we'll exile the Breach. Breach is exiled. My opponent didn't do anything in response. Kind of strange. Down to 4 life. Untap. Drew into a Bowmasters. Start with an attack for 3. Draw a card off our clue. Drew a March. So I think we're going to leave our Bowmasters and our March up. Opponent leads on an iteration pre-combat. Mishra's Bauble. A second iteration. And a Flooded Strand. They fetch with the Strand. Steam Vents. Second Channeler. Bauble. Double triggers. EE to the graveyard, keep the second card on top. Look at my top card. We will just have lethal. Attack for 3, go down to 4. Flash in the Bowmasters. Our opponent scoops. Opening 7. A little slow, but I think that we're going to keep this. We're going to leave Godless Shrine tapped. Pass the turn. Opponent Arid Mesa, fetch, Sacred Foundry, Goblin Guide. I think this should be a good matchup. Seems pretty good against Burn. If we can establish a Martyr of Sands and an Abiding Grace in play, we'll be able to loop Martyr turn after turn, making it almost impossible for our opponent to defeat us. We'll untap. A little unfortunate our land's going to come in tapped. Play on our Thraben Inspector. Make a clue. Back to our opponent. Opponent fetches, gets a basic Mountain. Searing Blaze down the Inspector. We're down 23. Attacks with Goblin Guides. Still no lands on top. Scorn Blade Berserker is revealed. Draw into it. And we're going to get our engines started, casting out our Abiding Grace. And we will return our Martyr of Sands into play. Opponent with a Swift Spear, Wooded Foothills, fetch, another Searing Blaze, attack for 6, drew a land, alright. Drew a second March, cast out our Ranger Captain, and we're going to get our Kami of False Hope. End of turn, we'll return the Martyr of Sands, and I'm going to sacrifice it right now. My opponent concedes. My opponent concedes the match. I think they realize they don't have a chance. Going into our 4th match with a 2-1 record, we're feeling pretty good getting paired against Living with plenty of answers to the Cascade spell within our deck. Unfortunately, in order to leverage those spells, we need to draw them first, which we were unable to do. Our opponent was able to revive their graveyard full of creatures in games 2 and 3, which spelled our demise in an uneventful sequence of games. We're 2-2 going into our final match against what should be an excellent matchup. Back on the play, opening 7 looks good, we'll keep it. Lead Arid Mesa, pass the turn. Opponent with an Inspiring Vantage into a Goblin Guide. Opponent attacks, reveals a Serra Paragon on the top. Not a card we want. We'll take a hit for 2. Fetch end of turn, Godless Shrine, tapped. Untap. Drew into a Marsh Flats. We'll play out our basic plains into our Squadron Hawk. And we'll put 2 more into our hand. Opponent basic mountain, second Goblin Guide. Attack for 4. Orcish Bowmasters on top. We'll block one of the guides. Opponent puts a Rift Bolt on the stack. Play out our Squadron Hawk. Use its ability. We'll get another Hawk. And we're going to pass turn from here. We're finally able to establish control of the board, but it's too little too late, as Rift Bolt, Skewer the Critics, and Boros Charm put us in the danger zone. Opponent casts a Lightning Helix, puts us down to 1, and there's a Lava Spike. Moving to game 2. Opening 7's acceptable, we'll keep it. Opponent keeps their 7, lead on Thraben Inspector, clue, pass turn. Sunbaked Canyon, back to us. Drew a Marsh Flats, played our Godless Shrine, Scornblade Berserker, target our Thraben Inspector, swing for 2. Opponent bolts end of turn. Basic Mountain, Searing Blaze, targeting our Thraben Inspector, sure. End of turn, we're going to sacrifice the Scornblade. Pretty good draw. Play out a Marsh Flats, we're going to fetch basic here. Squadron Hawk, put 3 other Hawks into hand, and our Forge Tender. Opponent with land, back to us. Drawing more lands, not really what we're looking for. Play out our Grange, target the Hawk, attack for 2, draw a card off the clue. Martyr of Sand's pretty good, we'll play that out. So our opponent basically needs to leave up Skullcrack for the rest of the game. Bloodstained Mire, Searing Blaze, sacrifice the Martyr, in comes the Skullcrack. We'll go down to 5. Tap, drew a March. We're going to fetch right now, get a basic Plains, attack for 2, and I'm going to cast out this Solitude now to play around another Skullcrack. We'll exile our Hawk. And with a Lightning Helix on the Solitude, we'll let that happen. Inspiring Vantage, they draw a card. Untap. Thraben Inspector. We're going to start there, draw a card. More lands, we don't want lands. Squadron Hawk, no. Attack for 1. Arid Mesa, pass the turn back. Sunbaked Canyon, opponent draws a card, good sign for us. Goblin Guide is fine. No attacks. We'll fetch end of turn, we'll go down to 5. We're going to get our Temple Garden tapped. Another land. Ugh. Attack for 2. Squadron Hawk, Godless Shrine tapped. Back to our opponent. Sunbaked Canyon, they draw a card. No attacks. Into a Skewer the Critics. I'm going to use the Forge Tender now. Untap. Thraben Inspector, draw a card. Ranger Captain is fine. Get ourselves another Thraben Inspector, attack for 3. I think there's a good chance we're dead on our opponent's turn. Play out another Inspector, Marsh Flats, back to them. Goblin Guide, sharp. Sacred Foundry, no attacks. Untap. Biting Grace, best possible card. Start by drawing a card, drew another March. Attack for 3, opponent's down to 4. Biting Grace, return Martyr into play. Upkeep, I'm going to sacrifice Ranger Captain. Opponent with a Boros Charm. We'll go down to 1. We're going to let that happen. So we can't get Skullcrack now. Opponent Fiery Islet. They draw a card. And they scoop. Game 3. Let me set the scene for Game 3. After opening the game with Forge Tender and Ranger Captain in our opening hand, we're feeling good about our chances, especially after sticking in Abiding Grace on turn 3. But our opponent has other plans as they play out a pesky Rolling Vortex, putting us down to 6 life. We have access to Haywire Might to remove the Vortex, but are lacking the green mana to activate the insect, so we're going to need to get creative to manage the situation for the rest of the game. Opponent with a Lightning Bolt puts us down to 3. Vortex, they're down to 13. In turn, we'll flash into Bowmasters, 1 our opponent, untap, we'll go down to 2. Drew another Godless Shrine, not what we're looking for. Start by sacrificing the Scorn Blade. Drew another Bowmasters, we're going to attack with the team. As expected, opponent blocks the Orc, we'll flash in another Bowmaster, target them, opponent goes down to 5. End of turn, we're going to return the Scorn Blade to play. We're going to target the Might, opponent with a Boros Charm end of turn. And this exact instance is the pivotal moment of our league. With my opponent tapped out, I have the opportunity to gain life, and I need to take it. I need to use the backup ability that I bestowed on the Might to sacrifice it, draw a card, and gain 2 life. After going up to 4 life, I can sacrifice my Forge Tender to prevent the damage from the Boros Charm, and then sacrifice my Ranger Captain during my opponent's upkeep to prevent them from casting a spell. I'll be able to return the Forge Tender at the end of my next turn to continue to stabilize and then win the game. But instead of taking that line, I do this. Sacrifice to prevent that damage. Feels like we're probably dead though. Untap. I'm going to sacrifice the Ranger Captain during the upkeep, just in case they have a handful of sorceries. Searing Blaze will put us down to 1. Draw a card. I think we're dead. Opponent with a Sunbaked Canyon. I don't think we have a way to prevent this, so that will be it. Close game. So unfortunately, committing a massive punt and not seeing the line turned this successful league into an unsuccessful one. But with testing leading up to the filming of this video, I can definitely say that this deck is viable in the modern format. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Be sure to subscribe, and I will see you all again very soon. You know the deal, everyone. Be well.